I want to talk with you about wonders without number. Okay, so there's a passage in the book of Job, and Job's going through kind of a difficult time. He's not doing too good. He's going through some major struggles. But there's a passage in the book of Job that says that God does great things past finding out and wonders without number. So I'm chewing that over in my head one day, and I realized that, well, you know what? God has done a lot of great things that are past finding out. They're beyond our comprehension. They're beyond our understanding. In this lifetime, we may never understand some of those great things past finding out. But the next part of the verse, what does it say? That he's also done wonders without number, an innumerable number of wonders that we can study, that we can look at. We can peek our head out the tent at those trees, or the sky, or the clouds, or a bug crawling on the ground, or some amazing birds, or things like that. And we have two options. We can give God the glory for those things. Or we can say, wow, look at what time and chance has accomplished. And that's what a lot of people say. But I want to look at a few of these wonders over the next few moments, and I want to start out with what I call God's little wonder. So this is my favorite example of a wonder. I talk about it in nearly every presentation. Everywhere I go, you're going to hear me say something about the hummingbird. All right. I cannot help. So we're going to hit, over the next few moments, wonders in animal biology, wonders of mathematics, wonders of our special earth, wonders in the universe, and the wonders, the ultimate wonder. Starting with what I call God's little wonder, the hummingbird. Because hummingbirds are the smallest birds on earth. They're the smallest warm-blooded creatures, yet they can fly 34 miles per hour. They can fly forward, backward, side to side, hover, and at birth they weigh less than a Post-it note placed on the palm of your hand. Tiny creatures. But what they do is they fly from flower to flower collecting nectar, and they can tell just by tasting the nectar what the sugar content is. If it's not at least 10% sugar, they move to the next flower because they instinctively know that anything less than 10% sugar content will not sustain their super fast metabolism with a wing that is beating at 80 times per second. That's right, per second. 80 times. 80 times, 80 times. And yet their heart is beating 1,200 beats per minute. Let me put this into perspective. If our heart beats a couple of hundred beats per minute, we probably ought to be headed to the emergency room because something's gone wrong. But you see, that hummingbird needs that fast of a heartbeat in order to enable it to hover. Huge problem, because the first time that hummingbird settles down on a long night, the hummingbird is going to run out of energy with that fast of a heartbeat, and it will die. It won't make it past the night. And yet we do still see hummingbirds, don't we? So something's happening. Well, now we know what's happening. What's happening is a miracle mechanism that is called torpor. But just because we know what it's called doesn't mean that it is any less of a miracle of God's design. So see, torpor in a bird, in this little hummingbird, slows its metabolism to 1/15 of normal, and it slows its heart from 1,200 beats per minute to 35 beats per minute. And the next morning, it wakes back up, it speeds its heart back up, and it flies away as if nothing ever happened. Now let me ask you a question. If this hummingbird didn't have this mechanism built inside of it from the first day, where would it be? Dead. That's right. Let me ask you another question. What if the hummingbird took millions of years to evolve this feature to be able to slow its heart rate down? Where would it be? Dead. What if somehow it was able to tell itself over a week's period of time, man, I'm going to die if I don't slow my heart rate down. I better evolve something really fast over this next week. Where would it be the first night? Dead. So what does this mean? The hummingbird was designed specifically with the ability of all of these different features that is nothing less than one of God's wonders without numbers. And we've only been able to scratch the surface. We haven't been able to talk about the two fovea, the two focus points in its eye that enable it to fly through trees at 34 miles per hour without actually smacking into a tree and killing itself. It can see in focus, straight ahead and side to side simultaneously. Isn't that something? So this is an example of God's wonders without number within the animal world. And yet, there are several different ways of looking at this hummingbird. You see, our thoughts, our expectations depend on our worldviews, the way we look at things. Because there are many, many people who would look at that exact same hummingbird we just saw, and they would say, wow, look at what time and chance has evolved. You see, there are so many different ways of looking at things. They look at the hummingbird in a naturalistic way. Evolutionary theory is a naturalistic creation account, and we'll talk about that more over the next few days because it's not really a creation account. Evolutionary theory doesn't address the creation of the universe at all. And evolutionary theory, by the way, is directly opposed to what we read in the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings. So, let's talk about evolution for just a second, because Charles Darwin, he lived in the mid-1800s. He traveled to the Galapagos Islands where he saw that finches could adapt. They could change in tiny little ways. And he said, wow, that's amazing. What if we gave them millions of years? Maybe they could change in big ways. No, that's where he took it a bit too far. So he noticed something that was observable, repeatable, demonstrable, adaptation, and he changed it into this monstrous theory that amoebas can turn into astronauts. We'll talk about that more tomorrow or the next day. All right, but you see, Charles Darwin had a credibility problem. If we look at the closing comments of his book on the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races, we read, there is grandeur in this view of life, evolution, with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one. What is he saying here? He's saying that there is a Creator? That's what it sounds like, doesn't it? And yet we find that he had a credibility problem. He buried in a letter to a friend that he was writing and admitted something pretty spectacular. He said, you know what, I long regretted that I truckled to public opinion and used the Pentateuchal term of creator, by which I really meant appeared by some wholly unknown process. In other words, he stuck the words by the Creator into his book to sell more books, to make it palatable to Christians. How many times do we see this happening by people who are trying to sell something across the public? They just change a few words to try to make it more palatable to the Christian, but it goes against biblical principles. We have to be careful about this, even in today's world. So let's look at the foundations of some of the greatest institutions of all times. For example, Yale. It was established in 1701 to train pastors. Yale's coat of arms today, still to this day, contains the biblical phrase written in Hebrew, Urim and Thummim, light and truth. Well, how far from the light and the truth have they gotten? If you were to visit the Yale Peabody Museum there, you would see the ascent from ape-like creature into mankind over millions of years, purported as fact. And if you have any doubt of that whatsoever, just go to the American Museum of Natural History in New York, where you can meet your relatives. This is what is being peddled to hundreds of thousands, millions of school children every year going through these museums, and they are learning that they are nothing more than relatives of animals, that they are nothing more than highly evolved ape-like creatures over hundreds of thousands of years. What does that do to their self-confidence? What does that do to their self-worth? What does that do to their biblical foundation when this is taught as fact to them? Now you might say, well, what effect does this belief actually have on our faith? Could it really be so serious? I say it causes men to question the truths found in God's Word, in the Bible. Proverbs 30 says that every word of God is pure. Add thou not unto his words, lest he reprove thee and thou be found a liar. Again, let me ask a question. Why should we really be so concerned? Can it be that important? Yes, it can. Joseph Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union, and he was an atheist. You see, he promoted atheistic education in the public school system, something that we see going on today in America. We should be concerned. And the official records indicate that he killed at least 3 million people. The number was likely much, much greater. What was his foundation? This is important. Where was he standing on this issue? He was walking with a childhood friend one day when he volunteered a pretty revealing statement. He said, "You know what? They're fooling us. There is no God. I'll lend you a book to read, and it will show you that the world and all living things are quite different from what you imagined. And all of this talk about God is sheer nonsense." And his friend is like, "What are you talking about, Joseph? What? What book?" He said, "Darwin. You must read it." See, Darwinian evolution is the first step on a very slippery path that leads us to believe that we are simply accidents of the cosmos. Even today, the battle rages on. Evolution versus creation, random chance or inspired design. Were we created with purpose, or were we conceived from chaos over 14 billion years? We have to remember our foundation. I think our foundation goes all the way back to the first verse of Scripture, Genesis 1:1, that says in the Hebrew, "Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz." In the English, we know it as "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Okay, so this is as foundational as it gets, because the beginning is the beginning of time itself. God exists outside of time. He created time for us. So we're talking about the first verse of the Scripture is the origin of all of time and history, and it is also the origin of space and matter as well. It's extremely foundational. What about Jesus? Did he teach with this same foundation? Yes, he did. Jesus actually said, if you would have believed Moses, you would have believed me, because Moses was writing about me. But if you don't believe his writings, how shall ye believe my words? What is he saying? He's saying that all the way back there in Genesis, it's talking about him, Jesus as the creator. This is important. This is foundational. Charles Spurgeon actually hit the nail on the head. Now, he wasn't as strong in some aspects of science, but he did not have as much information as we have today. He still understood the dangers of evolution. Here's what he said. Listen to this. "The philosophy now in vogue labors to shut God out of his own creation." You hear that? These people inform us that by some means this world and all that is therein were just evolved. But even this will not long content the men of progress. Now listen, this is important. He said, they care nothing for evolution in and of itself, but only so far as it may serve their purpose of escaping from the very thought of God. It is. He hit the nail on the head. This evolutionary concept is just one tool of the atheist, of those trying to ignore God, trying to suppress the truth of God, but that's not the real agenda. Evolution is not the real agenda. It is to get you to reject God himself. Charles Spurgeon, though, said, "One day people will speak amid roars of laughter of evolution, and the day will come when there will not be a child but will look upon it as being the most foolish notion that ever crossed the human mind." I actually believe that day is coming. I think that he's right. However, it's sad to say, I believe that it will be replaced with something equally or even more ridiculous. Evolution will probably be replaced with aliens or something else. So there will always be an excuse to try to cut God out of the picture, but the day is coming when evolution will be buried. What about the foundations of the United States of America? Well, one of the founding documents states this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their government with certain..." Oh, did I get that wrong? Oh, no, I think I missed that. What does it say? That they are endowed by their creator. Not their government, not anything. The creator gives us the unalienable rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, that's something that can't be taken away from us. This is the foundation of our country. What about the foundation of some of the greatest scientists of all time? For instance, Galileo. Galileo Galilei was known as the father of modern observational astronomy. He discovered 4 of Jupiter's largest moons, and Galileo stated that mathematics is the language with which God has written the universe. Is that true? If that was true, then we should see patterns of that, shouldn't we? Let me tell you about a man by the name of Leonardo Fibonacci. Leonardo Fibonacci was an Italian mathematician who traveled with his father down into northern Africa, and he became familiar with the Arabic numeral system. So, he's familiar with Roman numerals on our old-style clocks that most of us don't even have any idea about today. But then he said, well, the Arabic numeral system makes things a lot easier to do experiments with, to try to do equations with. So he proposes this sequence of numbers where every number is the sum of the previous 2 numbers. It's pretty simple, actually. So 1 plus 1 is, everybody, I need your help, 2. We're going to drop down those last 2 numbers down to the next line, so that 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. And then we keep going. So the sequence actually looks like 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, and so on. This is just a random sequence that some fellow just happened to think up in his head. Or is it? And then we started to look around the natural world and discovered some pretty interesting patterns. For example, the pineapple has ridges. And if you start to count the ridges of the pineapple, you're going to notice that one way it has 8 ridges and the other way it has 13 ridges. Well, those are both Fibonacci numbers. Numbers of the Fibonacci sequence. Interesting. Why should that be? And then if you look at the center of a sunflower, it has seeds, and those seeds are arranged in rows. Well, if you start to count the rows of seeds, one way it's 34 rows, and the other way it's 55 rows. Those are both numbers of the Fibonacci sequence. Strange. And this blew me away, Brussels sprouts. I figured this out recently. Brussels sprouts actually grow in the Fibonacci sequence. I always thought they grew like this right here. But I was wrong. They grow in the Fibonacci sequence. No, so you can actually take this one step further. You can take a piece of graph paper, okay, and you can start to draw boxes. 1, 3, 5, and so forth and so forth. And you then take each square and you create a spiral that spirals out along those lines. Let's see if I can make it do it. And it's a golden ratio that scales up by about 1.618, okay? This is called the golden ratio. It's another component of Fibonacci. So everybody was like, well, what if we could find this golden ratio, this spiral shape, in the natural world? That would be pretty neat, wouldn't it? And everybody's thinking, and the first thing that they always come up with is the Nautilus shell, which is not a Fibonacci spiral. This is a logarithmic spiral. It's just as beautiful, it's just as complicated, it's just as well designed, but it's not a Fibonacci spiral. So maybe we're trying to take it a little bit too far. Or are we? Because the design of the outer ear actually follows a Fibonacci spiral, but only as a child. Because as we grow, our earlobes distend and it gets out of a perfect Fibonacci spiral. And then we take our satellites and look down and we realize that some hurricanes follow almost a perfect Fibonacci spiral. And then we take our telescopes and point them up into space and realize that some spiral galaxies actually follow a Fibonacci spiral. Even the shape and growth of eggs many times follows a Fibonacci spiral. But here's what I'm telling you. We've only begun to scratch the surface of numbers, because Galileo, he said that God used mathematics in creating the universe. All right, now let me put this into perspective for you. Let's just say that we are the result of chance. of time and chance, of evolution, of mutations, over 14 billion years. Why would we be able to think of a sequence of numbers and then go out and find those numbers and that pattern all throughout the universe? There's no reason, is it? But let me give you another possibility. What if we have a grand designer, a God who created this universe using mathematical principles, using the Fibonacci sequence, and then he created us in his image with just a tiny fraction of his ability to comprehend mathematics, with the ability to think of the Fibonacci sequence in which he created the universe. Then we should expect to be able to go out there and find these same mathematical sequences that we can think up in nature because we were created in God's image. Let me point this out to you because this is pretty significant now. Numbers are abstract. They don't really exist. They're in our brains. So I could say that there are 3 items on this desk right here, but that's not really the number 3, is it? It's just me saying that there are 3 items. I could write the number 3, but is that 3? No, it's just a representation of what we're thinking of 3, right? I have a friend who's an astrophysicist who has his PhD from the University of Boulder, Colorado, and he said, I like the way he puts this, he said, you can't stub your toe on a number 3. It just doesn't exist, okay? So, why do we find numbers that don't exist all throughout the natural world? It's because it's not the natural world. It is the created world designed by God. It's the only way to explain why this would be possible. Now, a number of years ago, about 6 years ago, I was watching Discovery Channel, National Geographic, PBS, NASA TV, Nova, I love the science content that they all put out. And yet at the same time, I always hate at the very end of every program, they take all of this good scientific data and all of this information, and then they're like, and all of this happened over billions of years of chance evolution. And I'm like, why can't we give the Creator glory for his creation? And my brother and I started talking about this, and we said, well, Discovery Channel, why couldn't we have our own Discovery Channel? So this was really spectacular. I don't even know how all of this worked out. It was just God. But within 3 months' time, we had a fully functioning, just online at first, but we had a fully functioning 24/7 television network broadcasting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different pieces of content, all science, creation content, all from a biblical perspective. It's like the Christian version of the Discovery Channel, and it's called Genesis Science Network. How many of you are familiar with Genesis Science Network? Okay. This is something that we've received salvation reports from people watching this network. We receive probably a dozen testimonials a week from people who are watching this network. We've had hundreds of thousands of downloads on Roku, on Amazon Fire TV, and then we have television stations, local television stations around the country who just take that 24/7 feed, throw it on a channel, and rebroadcast it free of charge. This has been a remarkable journey, and we've seen a lot of good come out of the Genesis Science Network. So if you're not familiar with it, go check it out. I just got back from Kansas, leading paleontological dig. We find sea fossils of creatures that are definitely marine creatures, giant dragons in the sea, mosasaurs, tylosaurs, turtles bigger than I can show you with my hands, fish that were 18 feet long, fish with fish inside of the fish's belly turned to stone. How does that happen? Rapid fossilization. We find clams, millions of clams. Some of the clams are in closed positions, indicating rapid burial. Some of these clams are larger than this, and they're in Kansas. So this year I had about 40 people, children and adults alike, who came with me out to Kansas. We spent a couple of days teaching everybody how to dig up those fossils safely. And then we also talked about the implications of what they really meant, that these are actually creatures that were buried during a catastrophic flood, the flood of Noah's day. And there is still time for you to join me on an African family safari. June 2023, we still have spots open. We go to South Africa and we look at all of the wildlife and we look at the stars and we look at the creatures and we stay in Christian resorts and we have Bible studies at night and we have teaching lessons and then we do a ministry day in the village. But if you're interested in that, talk to me about that. The newest development is the Wonders Center. For years, I'll tell you the story in the next day or two, but for years, we have about 6 or 7 years now. We've been in Lewisburg, Tennessee. We've been in about a 12,000 square foot facility, and we have our television studios, we have our offices, we have a small event room, and then some displays that were donated to us. Well, 3 months ago, 3 months and a couple of days ago, we got the keys to a very, very big upgrade. It's called the Wonders Center and Science Museum. It is just 35 minutes west of downtown Nashville, and it is pre-built. It was built as an arts and science center for the community, but it was never intended to glorify God. We are converting this into an amazing facility that will see a lot of people come through, a lot of youth, a lot of adults come through and learn the truth of God's creation. So I'll tell you more about this as the week goes on, but the Wonder Center and Science Museum just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. So I want to talk to you for a moment about astronomy. Dr. Wernher von Braun, we've been looking at the foundations of this country. We looked at the foundations of Galileo. We looked at the foundations of the Bible. We looked at our universities like Yale. Harvard was another example. They all started from a biblical perspective. What about the foundation of another famous scientist, Dr. Wernher von Braun? Dr. Wernher von Braun actually was the head of NASA even before NASA was actually a thing. Dr. Wernher von Braun's calculations helped get men to the moon and back. What did he say? He said, for me, the idea of a creation is inconceivable without God. In other words, you can't have a creation without a creator. Does that make sense? You can't have design without a designer. Does that make sense? So Dr. Wernher von Braun said, well, when I look up there at space, what I see is creation, and that's inconceivable without a creator. Johann Kepler actually stated that when he's looking through telescopes, when he is seeing things that no one else on Earth had ever seen to date when he's looking at them, he realized that this was something special. And he said that God himself waited 6,000 years for his work to be seen. So he's saying, I'm staring at galaxies, I'm staring at stars, that God waited 6,000 years for anybody to be able to see. And then you might ask, well, why would God do that? Why would he do something like that? Psalm 19:1 states, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. It says that day unto day utters speech, and night after night shows knowledge, but there's no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. In other words, the heavens are there to declare God's glory. They're there to proclaim how majestic he is. And we can see that just on a dark night, just by looking up at the stars. But God knew that one day we would be inventing technology like a telescope. And he said, you know what? All of these artistic brushstrokes, these nebulae and these galaxies that I've put up on my artistic canvas of the universe, I'm going to put some of these where you will be able to see these as soon as you create the technology to see them. And then years down the road, we create the Hubble Space Telescope and we see a little bit more. And years down the road, we send up the James Webb Telescope, which just got up there, and there is no telling. We're about to be shocked, and shocked in a good way, at the things that are going to come out of the James Webb Telescope. All of them are going to point back to God's design. I have no doubt of that. So Kepler noticed this. He said, God has waited 6,000 years for his work to be seen. I started about 15 years ago taking photos of space, connecting cameras to the back of telescopes. And one of the first photos that I ever got was this one right here. It's the Great Orion Nebula. And I sat there staring at it for a very long time, and my jaw kind of dropped because I'd seen the Hubble Space Telescope pictures in my favorite magazines, and I was like, yeah, but they probably doctored that. It can't look quite that good, right? And then I took the picture for myself. And that was what caused me to start ministry, was this awe-inspiring moment of astrophotography. So space, there's something special about it. Not long after that, I took this picture of the Rosette Nebula. It looks like a rose in space. So let's sort of wrap this up by talking about space for a moment. All right, but before we do, we probably ought to talk about Einstein's theories of relativity. We've all heard the equation E equals mc squared. No, we're not going to get into that tonight. That's way too complicated. But here's what I want to do. I want to talk to you for a second about the distance to stars and galaxies, okay? So let me see if I can put this into perspective. When I talk about stars, galaxies, nebulae, things like that, I usually talk in terms of light years. We also sometimes talk in terms of astronomical units or parsecs, okay? But that's kind of difficult to grasp, all right? How many people really understand that a light year is the distance light would travel at 12 million miles a minute after an entire year? That's hard to grasp. What about an astronomical unit? What about a parsec? Do we know what a parsec is? It's okay, I'll spell it out for you. It's merely the parallax of 1 second of arc. So now we can move on, right? No, we don't. That's hard to grasp? Yes, it's hard to grasp, all right? So I got to thinking about this, and I realized that if Einstein has his theory of relativity, I could have my own theory of relativity, couldn't I? I call that the Reeves theory of relativity. Now, I hope you all brought notebooks and pencils because this is pretty complicated. I'm going to go through it as fast as possible. It's really, really scientific now. Get this now. If your relatives can't understand what you're talking about, use simpler terms. That's the Reeves theory of relativity. We have to break this down so that we could actually share these things with others, so that we can be more effective witnesses for Christ, so that we can go out there and tell people about God's glorious creation and the things He's done. But we have to learn how to do it in a way that is simple, in a way that anybody can understand. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to take our closest star, which is 4.3 light years away. There's that light years term again. How far is that? That star is Proxima Centauri. It's in the Alpha Centauri group right over there. This is a picture that I took from South Africa on the last trip. But that little star is too small for us to even see, is about 4.3 light years away. How far is 4.3 light years? The book of Job says, is not God in the height of heaven? Behold, the height of the stars, how high they are. Yeah, they're really, really far away. All right, so the Southern Cross is over here. You can see it from the southern hemisphere, but not from North America. Alpha Centauri is over in the bottom left over there, and Proxima Centauri is over there. All right, Proxima Centauri looks like this. So let's take our fastest spacecraft, the Voyagers, the New Horizons, currently on their way into interstellar space as we speak, traveling at about 40,000 miles per hour. Now that's pretty fast. We can all understand miles per hour, right? And that's pretty fast. So let's jump on our fastest spacecraft, the Voyager spacecraft, and take a ride to our closest star, only 4.3 light years away, right? 70,000 years later, we would just be pulling up to the gas station at Proxima Centauri. When you put it into perspective, you realize that even our closest star is so far away. It is impossible with our current technology for us to even begin to attain that. And yet, we can observe it, and we can study it. Here's the point, and I'm going to show you one more. I'll show you two more. Andromeda, our sister galaxy. This one's outside of our galaxy, the Milky Way. The Andromeda Galaxy is about 2.7 million light years away. Well, what is that at the speed of our fastest spacecraft? That would take us about 48 billion years to reach, traveling at 40,000 miles per hour. And yet we can take pictures of it. We can study it. We can look at it. The Whirlpool Galaxy is the final example. This one would take us about 500 billion years to reach what you see on the screen. All right, in other words, it's not possible. In other words, what I'm telling you is that God has done great things past finding out and wonders without number. This is one of his wonders without number, and we've again only scratched the surface of his magnificent cosmos of the heavens that declare his glory. But before I conclude, I want to end with the greatest wonder of all. John 1 tells us, in the beginning was the Word. It says that the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. It says that all things were made by Him. It's talking about Jesus here. Without Him was not anything made that was made. He was in the world, and the world was actually made by Him in the beginning, but the world knew Him not. He came into His own, and His own received Him not. But as many as received Him, to them gave He power to become the sons of God. Colossians says, by Him were all things that are created, that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, and He's before all things, and by Him all things consist. Isn't that amazing? But it's talking about Jesus here as the Creator. John 3 says, God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So here's what I want to leave you with. Genesis said, God said, let there be light. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. So just as the great wonders in the sky above are examples of His workmanship, you are His workmanship. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. We were the final example of His creation, and we need to remember to thank our Creator for what He has given us as believers in Him, the privilege of eternal life and eternal enjoyment of His creation. As it is written, eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man, the things which God has prepared for all those who love Him. I'm David Reeves. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God.